Nathaniel Badder, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's great to have you in, finally.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I think what we can maybe start off the podcast, since this is the first time back after the summer, first episode. I don't even know what number we're on right now, but we spoke a little bit coming back to school about your summer and some of the things you did, some of the adventures you had, and kind of just curious about catching up about that with you and maybe what it's like to be back in the building this year so far.
Yeah, thanks. I'll start from the bottom up on that. Being back in the building is great. It's cool to see the kids again. It's exciting to get that energy again. Over the past 18 or so months, that's really been missing. And even though I'm not in the classroom and with the kids every day, you feel that on a daily basis. And so to have the kids back, to have the teachers back, even though they're masked up, it feels really good. Jeff Gulline was talking the other day about how he knew it was time or he knew school was back in session. And it was a good thing because the conversations we were having were about like dress code violations and schedule issues. It wasn't about like COVID testing and outbreak cases. So it was just a really normal feeling. Mm-hmm. The big difference right now, it feels like, is masks. And if that's our biggest issue, I think we're doing pretty well. So that feels pretty good. Our world doesn't change a ton in the development department when the kids are in session. It's a little more busy because more people are around, but generally speaking, we kind of keep going all year round. Mm-hmm. But for me personally, and I think probably for a lot of people, the summer was a great time to get away and recharge. Gilman told us we could work remotely, so I took them at their word, and I bought a camper van, a 20-foot Dodge Ram ProMaster, and packed my 2 dogs up and drove around the country for 2 full months.
2 months? Wow, yeah. I didn't know it was that long.
Yeah, so left here in early June and came back once briefly and left again, but was really gone for 2 full months. And I think I drove about 7,000 miles. I ended up actually getting tennis elbow in my right arm from driving so much.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I've been seeing Nick and Kristen in the training room to get a little treatment on that.
Oh, my gosh. Did that get, so driving across the country is something that I've been thinking about doing a little bit. My mom drove my younger sister out, I've told you this, to Seattle, where they ran into Dan Christian in Iowa City, and then we got him on the podcast. But they did that, and I've been thinking about doing it. What was it like by yourself with your dogs to drive through states and different places?
So just by way of backstory, this is like the 12th time I've driven across the country. So it's sort of become old hat at this point in a way. On the other hand, the last couple times I've done it, it's been like a straight run, cannonball run, kind of leave and get there as fast as you can. Yeah. This was much more about like, what can I see and what places can I go that I haven't been before? So I take you back, like back in 1996, I was a sophomore at Middlebury College. A buddy and I got jobs working on a dude ranch in Wyoming for the summer. So in May of that year, we piled in my little Toyota pickup truck and just headed west. And I think like I had been out of Baltimore and out of Maryland a couple times for lacrosse tournaments or family trips or whatever, but never really like explored. And I think literally and metaphorically, that trip like really opened my eyes to the wider world out there and got me excited about travel and exploring and like seeing new cultures and new people. I think the highlight moment of that trip was we drove out to the Badlands in South Dakota, got in late at night, so it's pitch black everywhere. And we have no idea what the Badlands are or what they look like. Wake up the next morning and it's just red rocks and these crazy formations, like as far as the eye could see. That's cool. And that like image has been seared in my head, since, for 5 years now. And I think has kind of fueled a thirst for travel and exploration. So back to this summer, this was a little bit more targeted, I guess. So I left from here, went through Western New York, down through Chicago, up through Wisconsin, across Michigan's Upper Peninsula, back down through Michigan's Lower Peninsula, and then beeline back to Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, and New York before coming home. And part of that was dog-oriented. I planned on heading out to the Southwest. Just thought it'd be a little too hot with the hounds out there.
Yep. So
did this kind of northeast and north central trip, and I just thought like Michigan is a hidden star. I know a lot of people from the Chicago area go up there, and it's a little hard to get to from here because even if you fly, you still have to drive a long ways. But if Michigan's like a hand, this like pinky area of it, the northwestern point, is just phenomenal. I mean, hiking, biking, swimming. You're on Lake Superior, but there's all these inland lakes, and like lake life is everything there. Everybody's got a porch and a dinghy or a boat or a water ski or something, and like they just kick it, and it looks magical. I mean, it is just stunningly beautiful. I'm sure coming up in a couple months, it gets pretty darn cold.
Yep.
But in the summer, man, it is terrific. And I loved being up there. I was biking and swimming in the lakes with the dogs and did a little hiking. I mean, it was just fantastic.
What, why did you settle on that? Like, where did that decision come from to go through Michigan and find that as like a hidden gem in the Midwest?
Yeah. Luck, I guess,
Yeah.
part of it. So last summer we had the chance to work remotely too. I was going to move to Colorado for the summer just for fun, and I actually fell for a scam on Craigslist where I sent a guy $1,000 to
No
rent
way.
an apartment. Yeah, turned out to be some jerk somewhere off and ate my money. Worst part about that was not actually going. It was having to admit to my parents, who I lecture all the time about cybersecurity, that I had fallen for it. So I think when that didn't happen, I just kind of kept in the back of my head, I want to do something. When they said we could work remotely, I was like, this opportunity isn't going to come again. I thought about trying the Colorado thing again and was like, I just kind of have my same life just in Colorado. And kind of in the interim there, I had sort of fallen in love with this like van life idea and decided to take a swing at it. So I bought the van. And then because I didn't want to go to the Southwest, the Northeast and North Central looked more appealing, a little cooler. And a couple people sort of independently told me Michigan was awesome. You should go there. And I said, well, hey, I'll go.
Yeah, word of mouth.
Yeah.
It's funny because I hadn't heard about van life before this summer, really. I didn't really know what it was all about or what it was even. But I went out to San Diego with a couple of friends from high school and met up with a friend from college. And I knew he was in San Diego and he was from San Diego. But he rolls up in his van that he had built out. And
Oh, he did it himself?
He did it himself.
Wow.
And he was driving up, I think, the coast of California this past summer, but he was in San Diego at the time and might have been in between jobs or something, just doing this for a couple months or something.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. One of my friends was like, dude, where do you shower? Like, what? He was like, you're looking at it. The ocean's right there.
Yeah.
He goes surfing and comes back to his van. He bops around. It's pretty cool.
It is. There are moments where it is a real challenge. Like you're always getting water and cleaning something. And the van flooded a couple times because my spare water tank spilled. And so the dogs and I are just covered in crap. But I also had a night up in Michigan again where I went to bed and had the big door of the van open, saw the sunset at like 9:30 because you're basically, as far north as Scandinavia. But the sun set at 9:30 out of one window of the van. Woke up and the sun rose at 5:30 out of another window.
That's so cool.
How do you get that experience on land?
Right.
In an apartment.
So what about for food? Like, was there a fridge in there, and would you usually eat? How does that all work?
It actually worked out great. Yeah, there's a fridge in there. It looks like a cooler, but it's plugged in and holds bread and turkey and beer if you need a refreshment along the way. And had a separate kind of pantry area for dry goods. My van didn't have like an indoor cooking area, so I had a camp stove I would just plop out. And I would generally set up camp for a couple days so I could kind of expand. What they say is like you're not living in the van, you're kind of living out of the van. So you have all your stuff outside and I can cook outside, and that made it a lot nicer. So I was, my diet was pretty normal, all things considered. And I would go grocery shopping every 3 or 4 days and get new supplies. And I think you tend, kind of like camping, you tend to eat more carbs than you would. You're not getting a ton of like fresh produce and meats and stuff like that. But other than that, it was fairly normal.
Yeah.
And I was generally in spitting distance of a grocery store or restaurant if need be. So would treat myself for a thing here or there.
Was it hard, I guess, you're with your dogs, but was it hard kind of being on your own? And did you have much interaction with other people on a daily, weekly basis? Or what was that part of the experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were parts of it that were lonely
at
times. And it probably went through some ups and downs with that. Particularly in the second half of the trip, I ended up seeing a lot of friends along the way. So when I went to Massachusetts, I hooked up with a couple of friends from college and beyond. Same up in Massachusetts. I saw my family for a week. So I made a point to kind of visit with people. When I was doing sort of the Western leg and more of the van lifing stuff, it was much more on my own. I kind of enjoy that.
Yeah. But
it does get a little lonely at times. The dogs are not great conversationalists. Good companions, not great at chatting.
Did you journal at all? Did you write some part of this experience down? Because I feel like it's like the modern day Thoreau,
Yeah.
like Walden Pond 2021.
Yeah, far from that. But I did a little journaling, a little exploring. I think what I thought I was going to have more time to just kind of sit and think and be and experience and reflect. What I found is it's much more like camping than road tripping. Like you're always just doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you're not, you don't want to write. You just want to like snooze or relax or go for a swim.
Yeah.
So I didn't do as much of that as I thought I would. But I did a little writing, here and there. Nothing publishable or worth sharing, but did a little.
I know I had some like reflections and thoughts on the past 18 months or whatever when I went to Montana this summer too, and I was surrounded by similar like beautiful mountains and landscapes and all of that, and it was easy to kind of wind down and reflect on COVID and everything. Was there anything that came out of this 2 months experience about like COVID and everything that happened that was interesting for you to think about or enlightening in any way?
I think one thing I realized, and I guess this was right about the time I was leaving. So this doesn't directly answer your question, but I think it's kind of interesting, at least to me. Was right around the time as I was getting ready to leave, the world was starting to open up a little bit. This is kind of May, June of this year. And you start thinking, in theory, you should be feeling pretty optimistic at that point. I found myself being really sad and frustrated and short with people. I couldn't quite square why that was. And I think what I had done is for like the previous 12 or whatever, 14 months, I just bottled up so many emotions of anger, sadness, frustration, disappointment, fear, anxiety, and all these. And then they just came bubbling out like at weird times and weird ways. And, so on one hand, you feel like you should be so optimistic. The world's returning to some semblance of normal and opening up. But I was feeling the opposite. And so it took me a while to kind of square that dichotomy of like, I'm feeling one way, but should be feeling another way.
Yeah. I think that's pretty natural for everyone. And I'm seeing it a little bit with some of the students, just because I think there's been such a dark cloud over everyone's head for so long that the re-entrance is, not as easy as you would think, because you've been kind of at your house and, not really as active or interacting with people on a daily basis as we are now, which has been awesome. It's been nice, but there's definitely some residue, some after effects of COVID.
And I think along with that, I think there's like an athletic mindset to some of this stuff where you're like, I'm just going to put my head down and grind. I'm going to get through this and then I'll be okay, because that's sort of what you do when you're running or biking or whatever. But when you do that, you ignore all of those emotions, or you push away all those feelings, and then they do come out at weird times. And as you said, it's kind of a residue that you kind of want to shower and like wash it off somehow.
Yeah. So that trip sounds awesome. I mean, 2 months, and what was it like coming back and getting your bearings, I guess, under you as we started the year in person, and things have kind of been somewhat normal, wearing masks around school, but has it felt like a fresh start for you this year?
A little bit. It feels a little like getting off a boat, where like, how you get that feeling where you're like still a little wobbly because you got your sea legs, and then, you're on steady land. It felt a little bit like that because I was so itinerant.
Yeah.
I wasn't sleeping in my own bed or in my own house. And I was used to moving every couple of days. And then to all of a sudden be back in one place was a little bit constricting. And I felt myself kind of chafing at the rules of society a little bit.
Yeah.
So that took a little bit of an adjustment. And I think too, I was wiped, man. I was so tired. Like the first week I was home, I just basically slept. It felt like, came to work, went home and crashed. There's so many logistics that go into like living the van life. Where am I going to sleep? What are we going to eat? Have the dogs been out? Is it too hot for them to be? Is there any place I can go biking? You're just always kind of wheeling and dealing.
Was that on a daily basis that you were trying to figure out what you were doing for that night, or had you mapped all of that stuff out prior? Or was it kind of like a rough sketch of what you were trying to do?
I think it was mostly like a rough sketch.
Yeah.
And I'd have kind of points of like, hey, I need to be here by a certain date, or I want to be there by a certain date. But some of the details in between were left to be filled in. And especially on the tail end of the trip, I got just kind of lazy about planning. I was like, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I think some of that is my own doing, right? That I made the bed enough to sleep in it. But
it's kind of nice to have it spontaneous too. It's like figure it out. It's part of the experience, I think, a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely part of the adventure.
Yeah. So I think what we can get to in this podcast episode is development and some of the things that you do here at Gilman in the development office, because I'm sure there are people, students, and even some adults too, who are like, the office is there and I know that it's important and I've heard about it. And I know Daniel and I know some people in the office, but what exactly is going on in there on a daily basis, and what's like the nitty gritty of a, day in the life of someone in development here at Gilman?
Yeah, it's a great question. I still wonder about that myself. So we're like I think a 10 or 12 person staff sit on the top floor of the Lumen Center. And collectively, I think we raise about $2.5 to $2.8 million a year, which is a huge number. And it accounts for actually about 8% of the school's budget. So the school, every year, the school forecasts a shortfall in its revenue. So between tuition and other revenue sources, that amounts to about 92% of what we spend every year. So the Gilman Fund and some of the other fundraising we do throughout the year, that accounts for that extra 8%. So it really is vital to the lifeblood of the school. There's all sorts of like specific funds and targets for some of the fundraising, but generally speaking, it kind of helps to fill that gap between what the school spends and what the school brings in. Mm-hmm. So it is really critical. I like to joke, I'm the one person in the department who doesn't have to actually ask for money. I try to make people feel good about the school and their relationship and make them feel connected to one another and to the institution. And over the long term, our hope is that when you feel good about a place, you're going to want to support that place. And I think that's kind of where development and alumni relations kind of really are at their best. I think in the corporate world, it would be sort of like I'm the marketing arm to a sales team. Mm-hmm. Kind of thing, where you want people to be engaged, you want people to be knowledgeable about what's going on, you want people to be connected, and by doing that, they might buy your product. In this case, they might support the school. So what does that look like on a daily basis? It kind of changes pretty often. I've become a semi-professional party planner. We have our annual reunion cycle where every 5 years, people in reunion classes come back to campus to celebrate their milestone reunions. Then we do a bunch of regional events where we go out to see alumni in different areas. Obviously, those kind of things have all been on pause and are starting to restart again through COVID. But that's a big part of what we do every year. And then we have a couple other sort of ways of connecting with alumni. We have an alumni board of governors, 30-person group or so of alumni from 1964 through 2014, who sort of serve as a communication vehicle between the school's alumni and the school itself, sharing information from the alumni base to the school and then taking information from the school back to the alumni base. So I'm sort of the staff liaison for that group, and they meet 5 times a year. Malcolm Ruff, class of 02, is this year's president. Great guy, does a great job with the group. Captivating speaker. I think he's destined for huge leadership things in the world beyond Gilman as well. And then we do some other sort of one-off events, whether it's a wrestling affinity or wrestling celebration around the Gilman Duels. We're going to do an alumni lacrosse game in November. We have an affinity group for entrepreneurs that we'll do a webinar on in October. We have a Black Alumni Society who wants to do some events to encourage Black alums to re-engage with the school. So it's sort of any connection point we can find with people to re-engage with the school we look for, and then try to develop the relationship through that.
What are some ways that, I guess, you like personally feel that you can reach people who might have been disconnected with the school or graduated a while ago and are doing something else? Maybe they're, invested in their career or their families, and maybe they've forgotten about Gilman a little bit in some ways. How do you draw them out and bring them back to contribute to the school?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if I had a really good answer for it, I'd be really good at my job.
Well, you are.
No, I'm learning. So I have one thing going for me that was just by good fortune, having gone here for 12 years and having gone here from the mid 80s to the early 90s. I crossed paths with a lot of people, or know of a lot of people, or know somebody who knows that person. And so that level of connection helps a lot. It just breaks down walls. It makes for a much easier introduction. The fact that I was here when Mr. Finney was here, The fact that I was here with Mr. Bristow and Mr. Christian and Mr. Holly were all here. That's a huge asset for me. And I don't mean that like I'm manipulating the situation, but it just makes a conversation so much easier because we can lean on a shared experience of saying, hey, did Mr. Finney ever do this to you? Or what about the time Coach Holly did this? There's just that natural level of conversation. And I would say 95% of the time when I reach out to somebody and say, hey, could you speak to some students? Or would you take a call with an alum who's interested in your field? 95% of the time they say yes.
Yeah.
It's very rarely that I have someone who says, no, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And even if it's someone who's had a bad experience or has a bone to pick with me or with our office or with the school, I found that if I just listen and shut my pie hole for a minute, that's often enough. They kind of just want to vent. They want to know that their voice is being heard, and they want to know that someone cares what they think. And that's been, I think, the biggest lesson I've learned is, talk less, listen more is really a great way. It's a skill for life, probably.
Yeah.
And this podcast is showing I'm not good at it, but it's been a huge asset to my role.
Yeah. And you obviously had such a positive, powerful experience as a student going to Gilman that would motivate you or make you want to stay involved with the school and work here and bring alumni back and keep this whole place together, people who are here now and outside of the present day Gilman, keep everyone connected with each other. Maybe we could talk about like what made your experience or some people who made your experience here at Gilman so positive and enriching to you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So two caveats. One, I went to Gilman for 12 years, so it's all I know. So it wasn't like I have something else to judge it against. It was undoubtedly a positive experience. It wasn't without its challenges or warts or whatever you want to call it. And then two, when I left for college, I didn't stay in great touch with Gilman for a while. And it's only been really since I've come back to Baltimore in the last 10 years and re-engaged with the school before starting to work here again that I've really, my appetite and appreciation for it has really increased dramatically. So that's an interesting thing just to remember sort of on the back end. I think what made Gilman special, and I think it's still what makes Gilman special today, it's not like the education, it's not the sports per se, it's the people in the halls that that's what makes it sing and dance. I don't remember the record of my football team, but I remember Coach Bristow and interactions I had with him, and same with basketball and Coach Holly and lacrosse and Coach Tucker. Those relationships are what stand the test of time. Going back to this van trip I took this summer, I get up to Acadia National Park in Maine, stunningly beautiful.
Love that place.
Yeah, I'm flipping through Facebook one day. I see that a classmate, Alex Katz, is in Bar Harbor or on Mount Desert Isle. So I'm around the corner from Acadia. He's posting all these pictures of cycling. I've gotten into cycling in the last couple of years. Send him a quick message. Hey, I'm going to be there next where I'm here. Can we get together and ride? And he says, oh, I have, I can't ride tomorrow, but why don't you come by the place? We'll go canoeing. I drive out to his house. We hop in a canoe, me and him and his two daughters. We go paddling around this idyllic place in Maine, just outside of Acadia. He convinces me to jump off a rock that's 20 feet high. I'm terrified of heights. He's a former college diver, so he has this perfect no splash dive in. And it's just this amazing experience. Alex and I hadn't seen each other in 27 years. Mm-hmm. And yet we can pick up right there in the middle of Acadia National Park and have this wonderful time. I think that's, to me, encapsulates a lot about Gilman. We didn't know the details of one another's life. There wasn't this huge drop-off of who are you and where are you? There's this deep-rooted connection and desire to kind of learn and reconnect with one another.
And I'll say that's one of the biggest benefits of social media that I think, and I think about all that's wrong with social media and Instagram specifically is I have so many mixed opinions on it because I really don't like Instagram that much. But the one thing that it does is when you're somewhere, when you're in the middle of Maine, when you're at Acadia National Park and you see he's there too, you can reach out to him and have that experience. So if you didn't have that, you might not have known that.
Absolutely.
So I think social media, as many flaws as there are with it, it really helps you for what you do and touching base and keeping track of people.
Oh yeah. I mean, we were talking about an issue yesterday where I was talking to a guy in the class of 2010 and they have a reunion coming up this fall. And he said, well, hey, it just looks like nobody knows about it. And I was like, well, we sent them a postcard in the mail, like a hard copy postcard that they would get out of the mailbox. We've sent a couple emails. How could they not know about it? He's like, well, I posted it on our Facebook page, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about it. And I think that's part of my challenge, right? Is like, I'm an older school guy, where email to me is like, that's our mode of connection and conversation. But for him, it was like social media is the way to get the word out. And I need to constantly remember that like, we have alumni going back to the 1940s, so their communication style is so different than the guys who are graduating this year.
Right.
And, to try to figure out how to cater our messaging to them so we can reach them and stay involved with them is really hard, but also really important.
Yeah. And it changes so fast too, because like Facebook is big with my parents and some people a little bit older than I am, but I don't have a Facebook. I'm not on there. And I know these high school guys in my classes aren't on it. They don't even really... They've never had a Facebook.
Yeah.
And they're barely even on Instagram. They're all on TikTok. So like trying to keep up with the social media trends just to reach people is, I think, part of it too, right?
My God, yeah. I actually had a little art business before coming back to work at Gilman, and it was just me basically. And the biggest challenge I had was how to spend my time marketing. Should I send emails? Should I post on Facebook? Should I do Instagram? And if you're trying to do all of that for a single person who's also trying to make the orders and build the projects and ship them out and do events, you don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
So as that the social media piece moves, companies, schools, whatever, are constantly trying to reevaluate, like, where should we put our resources so that we can reach people, even though we know it's going to move away from us soon. It's just like this ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
You feel like you're chasing a fart in the wind almost.
Tell me a little bit about your art business and how that started, because we've talked since I first met you about that, and I've been fascinated by it. 36 letters, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So 36 letters came from 26 letters and 10 numbers too. I called it photo letter art for lack of a better name, but it meant that I took pictures of objects that looked like letters and then framed it together to spell words. And it started, actually it's kind of coincidental timing now with this most recent earthquake in Haiti, but back in 2010 there was a huge earthquake in Haiti. I have a sister who at the time was at Bryn Mawr, and her classmates were all required to develop a piece of art that they could auction off, and the proceeds would go to support the victims of the earthquake. So we were walking around downtown one day, and we saw someone who did something kind of like this, and we said, oh, we could do that. So we dragged my dad around one morning with a camera, took a bunch of pictures, spelled out Hope for Haiti, and sent it off to their show. And it just kind of stuck in the back of my head. A couple years later, I didn't have Christmas presents for my family members. So anybody who owned their own home at the time, I spelled out their address in that same kind of style. And this one is that's closer to what I did most recently. And everybody loved it. And they said, oh, you should sell these. So a couple years later, I opened a little Etsy shop and sold when I say a small amount of pieces, I mean like a micro small amount of pieces. But again, it just kind of stuck. And I've always had sort of an interest in photography, and I think I have a pretty good eye for photography. Don't have some of the skills of Photoshop that some folks have, but I think I have a pretty good eye for framing and setting a picture. And that, I think, was what drove my interest in it. And then in 2014, I was working at U.S. Lacrosse. I was overseeing our national lacrosse teams, and I just kind of burned out. And so relatively abruptly, I just quit without a real plan of what I was going to do. I went out to Loch Raven Reservoir in Baltimore County and went for a hike. And I was like, I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to get my next job. And like 15 minutes in, I got stuck on this letter art idea, and I kind of wrote a business plan in my head. Came down, I started a Kickstarter campaign, raised a little bit of money to kind of get off the ground. And for 4 years, that's what I did full time, was make photo letter art. And
wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, it's crazy to me to think that, like, here's a dumb jock from Gilman, with no training in art or business, who's sold thousands of pieces that are now hanging on people's walls around the world. I mean, around the world. So there's a few that are international, but like mostly in the States. And that's just like so cool. I think you probably think about this too, but I think a lot about like legacy and what will I be remembered for? And like when I die, will people what will they have to remember that I was here? Mm-hmm. And to know that there's like artwork hanging on the wall in someone's house is just so wild to me. And so
it's very cool.
Yeah, it's flattering and exciting and neat. And it started, I think, where I saw the biggest evolution, sorry to go on and on, but I At first, it was just friends and family buying it, and that was nice. They were supporting me.
Yeah, yeah.
And then soon I saw that strangers were buying it. But I still knew or met most of the strangers who bought it. And then it was real strangers who I've never met in my life who are anywhere in the country who were buying it. And that's when I was like, well, this is really neat. It's out there.
And the way that you reach the strangers is through Etsy. And I don't really know too much about that site, that website.
Yeah, so Etsy is sort of a craft arts festival online. It was Etsy at first, and I switched to my own website later on just because there's a customization piece that you could do on my site that you couldn't do through Etsy. But it's a online crafts community. You could sort of say if I wanted a hat that said, best dad ever, you could get that, or, worst dad ever, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's someone making it on Etsy, or if you need like a flowered napkin made from silk.
All kinds of things on there.
I mean, everything you've never thought you needed is on Etsy.
Yeah. And did you just walk around with an iPhone? Did you have a legit camera that you used? And was that like for 4 years when you were doing this, was that your like day to day? You would just walk around, try to figure out what objects and things look like letters, and then putting all that together? Was that kind of what
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And you're kind of an artistic guy or like a creative guy, so I think you can kind of appreciate this. But early on, what drew me into it was that I love taking the pictures. I love finding new letters. Some letters are much easier to find than others. And when you find that Q, which is impossible to find in nature, one of my big things was no letter could be manipulated or staged. It had to be found object.
Oh, I like that.
So you couldn't take a piece of rope and swing it around. So it had that little crossing point in a Q. You had to find the Q, and that's really hard.
Where'd you find the cues? I'm curious. now I'm on it. Where
unfortunately, I don't have my website, but I can send you some examples. But there is an amazing richness of metalwork in the Baltimore area, whether it's on fence posts or railings and banisters or under chairs and benches. That was like a treasure trove of hard to find letters and numbers, R's, Q's, stuff like that. I could often find in there. I mean, I had only 3 or 4 Q's, as where I might have had 70 T's.
Yeah. Was there a specific place that you went exploring or walking to do this, or would you try to find a different area of Baltimore every single time? And did you go outside of Baltimore in these 4 years?
Good questions. It started in Federal Hill because that's the first place we walked. Fells Point became a go-to place. And then sometimes I would just go on a couple-hour letter walk and try to find them. And then as the business evolved, I would, whenever I travel, I try to find a new letter. So have the Golden Gate Bridge as an H, and have some pictures from Nantucket in Massachusetts, and even a couple international ones from Iceland from trips I've taken. So I found like the mud on the bottom of my shoe. It's a picture like the cleat of a shoe, and then some icy mud fell out. It had like an orangish color, and it made a perfect A.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you're looking for it, you find it.
Yeah.
But back to one of your questions. So what got me into it was the interest in the photography and finding the letters. If you do that all day, you're not going to sell anything. And I think that's a challenge for any creative, is like, how do I draw that line between making the art and selling the art? Mm-hmm. And so increasingly, as I decided I wanted to keep the lights on and have some dinner to eat in the fridge, I found I had to focus more on the business side than on the art side. And that was a different approach. I actually liked it. I liked the challenge of trying to have the business flourish, but it was very different than the challenge of making the art. Mm-hmm. And so what I did, and I think probably what some folks in a similar place would do, is sort of find a thing that works and then figure out how to sell it. And what I found is there are a lot of locavores here, people who love Baltimore. And so I have a bunch of stock pieces that, most people would do their name or their sports team or their address or their business or whatever. But I had a bunch of stock pieces that said Baltimore or Ravens or Orioles or Charm City. And people love that because they love Baltimore. And then for those, I could tell you where each letter was taken. So the B was a box spring in Butchers Hill, and the U was a swing set in Hamden, and the M was a ladder to get into the harbor in Fells Point. So being able to tell that story with the piece of art made it really special for people. And that allowed me to kind of sell it a little bit more and not have to focus on making the art as much.
And would people reach out to you and commission I'm sure they would commission like their name or someone for a gift?
Yep.
Was that kind of how it was done otherwise if it wasn't a stock?
Yep.
piece.
So you could go on my website and you'd type in your name and then you'd click
Got
on the
it.
S and you'd see all the different S's. You'd click on the C and see all the different C's. You'd
Oh,
click on the
cool.
O and see all the different O's. Oh, I like this one. I don't like that one. I want color. I don't want color.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and then it evolved to a couple larger scale pieces, which was really neat. I went through a small business program through Goldman Sachs, and our graduation ceremony was actually really neat. Lloyd Blankfein from Goldman Sachs and Warren Buffett and Michael Bloomberg were all there, and they commissioned me to do a 3 foot by 18 foot version of my Baltimore sign that hung over center stage.
Wow.
And was right there as those guys are speaking to the audience.
That's so cool.
It was pretty special, yeah.
Wow. So this was big time.
It was little time with a few flash moments of feeling like it could have been big time.
Did and what made you kind of change directions after the 4 years and kind of get into this, right? Development
exactly.
after.
I think there were two things. One was just purely financial. I was making enough money to keep the lights on, but not really to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And then two, I was working by myself 80% of the time.
Right.
And I was just in search of sort of a community.
Yeah.
To be a part of. And so when this job at Gilman came up, I said, I kind of know that community. I like those people. And I had no background in alumni relations. As I said earlier, I do have the blessing of being an alumnus, but they were willing to take a chance on me, and it's been a really good run since. I think this is now my 5th year that we're starting on.
So thinking back to your time at Gilman, who were some maybe coaches, teachers, even classmates who made Gilman special for you, and really when that job opened up, really made you want to come back after maybe not thinking about it so much prior, but then when it came up, you're like, I want to get back to this community.
Yeah, I mean, how much time do you have? There's a laundry list. I've mentioned a couple already. Mr. Finney jumping on desks when I was in lower school and coming into the weight room and like bench pressing the whole rack with his suit and tie on. Like, those are drilled into your memory, and you just never lose those images. Coach Holly in basketball, I was playing basketball. I forget why he wanted me to do it, but they were about to inbound the ball. And he said, step over the baseline. I did, and I got a technical foul, and I got kicked out of the game. And the ref said to Coach Holly, why is he getting kicked out of the game? That's a legal move. It just draws the foul. And the ref goes, he's a football player masquerading as a basketball player. Get him out of here.
Oh, my gosh.
Coach Holly tells the story much better than I do, but that moment kind of resonates. Played football for Coach Bristow before my senior year. I was an offensive lineman. Hard to believe now because the guys are significantly bigger.
Yeah.
But we're jogging around the scenic path. There used to be a chip path that went around the campus. And he said, I think we're going to use you at tight end some this year. And here's an offensive lineman, never gets to touch the ball, thinking I might get thrown to. Last time we had that conversation, never heard from him again on that. So that moment, but it sticks with you,
Yeah.
So those are some of like the Gilman luminaries. There's others though, like Don Rogers, I think you've had in here before. Yep. Don used to say, I had him from middle school math, and he would start a story by saying, so I says to myself, self, blah, 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 blah. And we'd go on with the story, and like, it always got a laugh from the whole class. And like, that was just Mr. Raj being Mr. Raj.
Yeah. He's a personality. I miss that guy. He was here my first year, but I think he left after that. So I haven't really seen him or touched base with him, but he was such a funny guy, personality.
Totally. There's another middle school teacher, Ted Waters, who's now doing great in the finance world and was a young teacher, not unlike yourself back then, middle school teacher. And I think I must have come into history every day and said, Mr. Waters, can we play football? And one time he just had enough of me and he's like, Thano, can we play history today? I was like, so I think those memories are what stick with you. And I'm sure I learned some stuff in the books, and I didn't apply myself to my studies as much as I should. I applied myself to the sports much more. But like those little vignettes, I just think are so telling of the relationships you build with your teachers and your coaches here.
Yeah, I've said this to my English classes a little bit. It's funny what you remember, like those like short kind of random moments that, you're going to play tight end that you'll never came to fruition. You never played tight end, but that still sticks out to you. It's so interesting the way that freezes in your mind.
Totally. And I have lousy hands, so he made a good decision not to play me at tight end.
Your eyes just lit up.
Oh man, who doesn't want to catch a pass? Yeah.
So what was it like what was Gilman like during the time that you went here in comparison to what it's like today? And I think we've had people on the podcast, alumni, Ned Emla has been on here kind of talking about some of the traditions that maybe we had here back in the day, but we don't have anymore, or some of the things that Gilman did and said and stood for back then that have been lost, but some other things that are still true today and haven't changed one bit.
Has sledding on freshmen come up?
Sledding on freshmen?
We used to use freshmen as sleds to go down the hill by Harris Terrace.
Yeah, it's probably not allowed anymore.
I think that's frowned on.
Sledding on freshmen.
Yeah. I think, and I say this in a positive way, Gilman today is a much more welcoming and encouraging and supportive place than it was 27 years ago. I think then, and maybe that was society, maybe it was Gilman specifically, maybe both, there was much more sort of a sink or swim mentality of if you got here, you should be able to cut it, so go do that. And most people were able to do so, but some fell through the cracks. And I think I was a athletic, smart enough white guy. I fit the majority on most accounts. And so Gilman was easy for me to fit in and to be a part of things. I imagine there are other people, I know there are other people who for whatever reason felt ostracized or left out or unincluded. I will say I don't think it was ever intentional. I don't think there were in policies, procedures, whatever, or people who were trying to push others away. It just was part of the fabric of the culture. It was very much do your stuff and move along, I guess. And so that, again, there are probably people who felt a little left out. I think Gilman today is so warm and so welcoming and so supportive that I think it's a very different environment in that regard. But I think so much of it stays the same. The Gilman 5 is new, but that's what we lived and talked about 30 years ago anyway. Maybe it wasn't called the Gilman 5. Maybe we didn't use all the exact same order of the words, but it was there. And it was what Mr. Finney embraced. It was what Mr. Montgomery carried from there. It's what Mr. Holly and Mr. Bristow and those guys and women all preached on a daily basis. It just kind of was imbued in you. And same with the Gilman skills that we talk about today, about thinking creatively and creating and collaborating. That stuff was all there. It just might not have been codified or articulated in the same way. So I think, you can say Gilman's a different place today. It is, and that's probably a good thing. I don't think Gilman could exist as it did 30 years ago in today's world. But I think the fabric of Gilman, the essence of Gilman has remained virtually unchanged.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think about too is just how students today at Gilman, it's very hard for them to be left behind in a lot of ways. Kind of just coming in here as a teacher and comparing it to my high school, which is a public school, larger school. I had like 517 kids in my class, so probably 2,000 in my high school. I feel like if you didn't really do well in your classes or do well on a test or you were struggling a little bit, it was easier for you to just be forgotten about because teachers had so many students and, it's pretty expensive. It's time intensive to like reach out to people and make sure that you're coming along and making up that test. But here it was just amazing to see how someone in my class doesn't have even a good day or fails a quiz or didn't read that day. So many people are involved after that one class, like advisor, other teachers. It's very close knit and people talk to each other all the time here. And it's very hard for someone academically, at least, to be left behind or be forgotten about, which I think is a huge part of like the value of Gilman. I think of some of the shenanigans that probably we got away with 30 years ago probably don't fly in the same way today. What was it academically kind of like as a high school student at Gilman? And would you say it was as intense academically as it is today, or kind of what were your classes like when you went here?
I mean, I think that every report card I had said something to the effect of shows great promise, should work harder. So I might not be the best person to ask. I was a solid B student, and without trying to toot my own horn, could have been an A student, but just did not put in the work necessary to do that. I don't think I read a book cover to cover until my junior year of college. So
got away with that here
somehow. I hope I don't get any English teachers in trouble as a result of that. But Mr. Christian, who you brought up earlier, is probably flipping over on his putting green right now. But I think it was. I mean, the joke was always, you went to Gilman, you went to Princeton, you came back here and worked for Alex Brown. Well, you're not going to do that if you didn't have academic success and academic chops. So I think that it was a competitive academic environment, and I think a lot of kids worked really hard to live up to that. And then some kids like me coasted because they could, or because they were focused on other things or whatever. But I think it was definitely a challenging academic setting. And I think there were some teachers, oh man, we haven't even talked about Mr. Schloter yet, but some teachers like Mr. Schloter and Dr. Thornberry, who they pulled out every ounce of academic chops that any kid had. And so yeah, I think you were pushed if you wanted to be, if you let them push you, I guess. And I mean that in a good way. Mm-hmm. You could, others like me somehow found a way to kind of knife between the challenge. But yeah, there were wonderful teachers and students who did amazing things and have done incredible things since Gilman as a result of that.
So you mentioned Mr. Schloter and Dr. Thornberry, who I know pretty well, and I wanted to get on the podcast because he's a very interesting guy. I don't know Schloter as well, but who were maybe some of the teachers in addition to those two that really were memorable, like the athletic experiences, the athletic moments that you brought up in the classroom at school here? Yeah.
Oh, man. Mr. Christian was a legend. He still reminds me of a 9th grade English project I did with Jake Beveridge. So this is going back to 1991, 30 years ago. And he talks about it as, I know he talks about books as being living and you're not, it's not, didn't happen. It is happening. Mm-hmm. But he talks about my English project like it's still happening. I think it was like a volcano exploding at the end of a Shakespeare sonnet or something. To me, it's unremarkable, but to him, it was just like encapsulated the spirit. And so I think Mr. Christian's one of those guys who could make any book interesting.
His memory is unbelievable. It's like that podcast with him. I could not believe the things that he was just bringing up and reciting, and he's an impressive guy.
He is. And there were others. There was a guy, David Noon, who I remember taking religion from, and I grew up in a pretty non-religious family, but he had such a deep knowledge and passion for the subject that I was inspired. And it's hard to think of my 16-year-old self as being inspired about anything. Mm-hmm. But you could just hear it when he talked about Yahweh. You could feel that energy. And it wasn't a preachy thing. It was an intellectual pursuit. And I think in a religion class in particular, that's a really hard needle to thread, right? You're trying to share the information, but not make it not make it preachy, not make it this is how you need to live your life kind of thing. And I thought he did that really well.
We don't have religion classes anymore. I'm curious, like when that went away and kind of what was like replaced that, because I guess that's something that's different from when you were in high school and now is there aren't religious classes anymore. Religion's not a subject to take. Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that. In fact, I think we have sort of a historical religion class that's an elective. But that I think Aaron Goldman teaches.
Yep.
And that's probably about it.
Okay.
And I honestly don't know the history of that. It's something we should look into.
I wonder if mind, body, spirit, was that a part of the Gilman motto when you were here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that I think the mission statement with some editorial tweaks, it's been pretty consistent over time.
Gotcha. So great. I think we covered pretty much your time here and some of the memories that stand out. Is there anything else that you kind of wanted to talk about, or memories from your time, or differences that you can think of? Or
I'll just add one sort of fun part about coming back to Gilman and sitting on the other side of the desk, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is it's getting to work as colleagues with people who were teachers and coaches of mine 30 years ago. So the fact that Tim Holly is here and Johnny Foreman is here and Dan Christian was here and people who had a formative impact on my young life, to now see them as colleagues is wild and exciting and fun. The hard part, though, is to go from calling them Mr. Christian, Mr. Holly, and Mr. Foreman to calling them Dan, Tim, and Johnny.
Yeah.
And I could do it with Tim. I can't do it with Johnny Foreman. I still call him Coach Foreman anytime I see him. Just can't get past it.
And so you played football, basketball, and lacrosse.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, being 3-sport athlete? You're obviously very focused on your sports, and you had some great coaches here. How did that really help you kind of develop as a Gilman student and then beyond?
Yeah. It's kind of funny, actually. So I think I was probably the best at football. I think I liked basketball the most, but I ended up playing lacrosse in college. So it's sort of like, it's funny how it works out like that. But I played 3 sports. I think in the 1980s, probably most kids were playing 3 sports. And in the late 80s, it kind of shifted. And by the early 90s, it was kind of down to 2 sports were the majority of varsity athletes, at least. So I think even then I was sort of a dying breed of the 3-sport athlete. For me, it was like, I just loved playing sports. I mean, it was fun. I loved being with my teammates. I loved competing. I loved the thrill of finding success in something. I already admitted I wasn't a great student. So to see my parents in the stands cheering for me because I did well, that was just a wonderful feeling of like self-confidence and self-value and worth. So that was really important. But I think just the camaraderie of being on a team and going through those ups and downs, and we had good football teams and so-so football teams, and we had decent basketball teams and so-so basketball teams, and we had okay lacrosse teams and excellent lacrosse teams. So to get that variety of experiences and to play a variety of roles. In football, I became a pretty good player, and was a captain of the football and basketball teams. In lacrosse, I had been a starter, but I actually got benched when we won the state championship my senior year. So to go through winning a championship but kind of losing my starting position was hard, but it's a really important experience to live through and to understand that not everything is going to be peaches and ice cream. There are going to be days you're disappointed, and you have to learn to get through that. So I think that it's invaluable. I learned 15 or 20 years later, you can have those same kind of experiences in a variety of venues. It doesn't have to be sports. I've watched a lot of the theater productions here and at other schools, and those men and women now, or kids then, have the same thing. You have to play a role, and sometimes you want to be the star, but you're in the chorus, and you got to learn all the dances, and you got to learn all the songs, you got to learn all your lines, and if you screw up, you're making somebody else's job harder, and it's the same stuff. Just for me, sports were the vehicle, and because again, as I've said, I was focused more on sports than on academics. It was the vehicle,
right?
And so it was instrumental into my growing up. And candidly, I think I've probably struggled with becoming an ex-athlete. Because for so long I defined myself as an athlete, and that's been sort of a lifelong challenge.
How did you decide to play lacrosse? If you loved football, basketball, maybe even more so than you loved lacrosse in high school, how did you decide to pursue lacrosse in college?
I think there were 2 primary factors. One, I was 6'2", 210 pounds, so my basketball career was done. And I was our center.
Pretty big. I mean, it's pretty.
Well, not for a center.
Oh, for a center.
Yeah. And in football, I just wasn't getting any looks at colleges. Middlebury had recruited me for lacrosse, and so that was sort of the path. I got recruited by a couple schools for lacrosse, so that was sort of the path I took, not really for any decision I made other than those were the options open. And Middlebury and some of the other schools that were interested in me are pretty good academic schools, so it made it a little easier to think about going to one of those and playing lacrosse rather than going to a less good academic school to play another sport that I might be more interested in.
What was your experience like with lacrosse at Middlebury, and maybe how did you, I know you worked for U.S. Lacrosse for a number of years, how did kind of that transpire afterwards?
That's a good question. Lacrosse experience at Middlebury was great. I didn't become the player I had wanted to, and a lot of that falls on me. I didn't work hard enough in the off season and on my fitness to really do that. I enjoyed the social life of college, but being a part of the team was fantastic, and my teammates remain some of my closest friends from my college experience. And the memories from college, similar to what we're talking about with Gilman, are mostly centered around sports type experience. It's like shoveling the field because it snowed a foot on April 18th, or a road trip to Bowdoin where we stopped at the same restaurant every year and would get more frozen ice cream, frozen yogurt rather than you can fill in a pitcher. So it's stuff like that stands out as just like fun memories that hold up over time. How did I kind of get into lacrosse for life, I guess, was I moved out to California soon after college and started working at a job doing frontline support for a financial software company. I was working East Coast hours, so I was out of there by 3 p.m. A lot of time then in the afternoons. And having gone to school on the East Coast and played lacrosse at an East Coast college, I kind of became a hot commodity for coaching. So pretty quickly I had people approaching me, asking me to coach it. And this is late 1990s, it's like 1998, 99.
San Francisco,
yeah, where their lacrosse team was really taking off.
Yep.
And they just needed people who knew a little bit about the sport to coach. So I coached a youth team for a year, coached at UC Berkeley for a year, and then coached at a high school for 2 years. And I was really enjoying that. I found out I didn't like the financial software company stuff. I liked the coaching. In being out there and doing it, I met a lot of people in the lacrosse world. Had an opportunity to go coach college lacrosse at Elmira College for a couple of years. Got my master's there while I was there. And so lacrosse kind of became this vehicle. And I bet 2/3 of the jobs I've gotten in my life are through some level of lacrosse connection.
Yeah, especially being from Baltimore, it's just amazing. Baltimore, as small as it is already, is like everyone kind of knows each other here, I've kind of felt. And having the lacrosse too, it's such a small world. It's a small world on top of a small world almost.
It is indeed.
So that's great. So you went to Elmira for a couple of years coaching there and doing the masters, and then after that is that when the 16 the 36 letters?
There were a couple other pit stops in between. I worked for a small nonprofit in Rhode Island, briefly worked for the NBA, actually as a news desk editor for their website for a brief stint. And then I got lured back to California and spent 2 years as the assistant athletic director at a high school in Los Angeles called Brentwood.
Okay, I think I knew that.
And when I left Brentwood, I came back here and got a job at US Lacrosse and was there for, I think, about 5 years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you've had the lacrosse thread through
the
it
buzz,
all.
Yeah. It's wild to think that I've coached lacrosse at the youth, high school, or college level for some 20 years. Yeah.
So another question I was thinking about when you were talking about your athletic career at Gilman and then at Middlebury, what was the best team that you've ever been on?
I mean, we won the state championship my senior year here at Gilman, and had a bunch of guys who who were All-Americans and all whatever players here in Baltimore, and went on to be All-Americans in college. So in terms of star-studded power, that's probably it. Lauren Smith was the best player on our team. He went on to be a 3-time All-American at Princeton and win a couple national championships there. Mark Corns actually won the Kelly Award that year as the best player in Maryland for us. John Tucker was the coach. He's an all-everything player and coach. A couple other guys went on to play college lacrosse. I think probably 8 of the 10 starters played college lacrosse, if not more. So I think that's probably the biggest bang for your buck. Yeah.
Most talented and obviously best season.
Yeah. And it was a cool time too because we hadn't been that good for that long. The late 80s and early 90s were a tougher time. So my sophomore year we weren't very good. My junior year we were kind of sniffing at the playoffs, and then my senior year to kind of make that run was pretty awesome. In fact, we beat Boys Latin 6-5. Their goalie was a guy named Brandon Mollett, who actually became a teammate of mine at Middlebury, and is now a lifelong friend and good buddy. But to remind him of that goal that he missed is a fun opportunity.
What was Tucker like as a coach?
I think the story that illustrates Coach Tuck to me the most is he would say things like, "I just don't get why you guys can't look over here and zip a pass behind the back to that guy who's wide open over there." And you're like, I didn't know there was a guy over there. And what's this behind the back thing?
Yeah.
He just could do things that you couldn't do. And I think for a lot of players, I think it's happened with, you see Larry Bird and Magic Johnson fail as coaches. I guess Larry did okay, but Magic didn't do great. It's often hard for a great player to become a great coach because they can't understand that other people can't do what they could do.
Yeah.
And I think Coach Tuck had a little of that. It was hard for him at times to relate to guys who couldn't do what he could.
Yep.
But he was a dynamite motivator and a brilliant tactician, and he got an incredible coaching staff together, and had enough good pieces on the table and moved them around in the right positions to get the most out of us.
Great senior year.
Yeah.
Great spring.
Yeah.
All right, Nathaniel. So I want to get to the book recommendation you brought in for us.
Oh, yeah.
Let's hear it.
Yeah. So, you asked me to think a little bit about favorite books along the way, and I got a couple bookshelves in my house. Quick update, though. I said I hadn't read a book since, until like my junior year in college. After that, I've become a pretty devoted reader. So I've self-styled, I guess, but I read a book called Sex, Death, and Fly Fishing, and it kind of opened my eyes to like, oh, this reading stuff is pretty cool. And you can learn some stuff and have some fun experiences. And as Mr. Christian says, it's living. It's always there and alive. And there's a ton of great books that I've read along the way. I love J.R. Tolkien stuff, and it's a great book by a guy, Rick Bragg, All Over But the Shouting, Fool on the Hill, A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. I'm a David Sedaris guy. I love everything Malcolm Gladwell writes. David Foster Wallace is a genius in my opinion. So I've got like a broad taste that covers a lot of territory. But I think my number one writer is a guy named Tom Robbins. I'm going to hold him up here to the camera. This book is called Jitterbug Perfume. You can see that it's held together by a rubber band. The cover and the back cover are tattered and fallen apart. That's because it's the only book I've read 3 times. And to me, Tom Robbins is kind of a reclusive guy, lives outside of Seattle, writes these kind of wacky, fantastic kind of stories and all novels about people wandering through time and space and figuring out their own self-identity and worth. And the stories are cool and the characters are wild and their names are fantastic. But I just love the way he writes. His way with a sentence is incredible. And I'm told that he doesn't actually do any editing, but he will work on a sentence until it's finished. And as soon as it's finished, he puts a period on it, and then it's done. That sentence is in the bank.
Never goes back to it.
Never goes back to it.
And it still reads it still obviously reads well.
It reads fantastically. And he goes on these long diatribes and these wonderful sort of colorful things. And he just has a flair with language and imagery and words. And it's just fun to read. And I couldn't even tell you really what Jitterbug Perfume is about, but I can tell you that I've loved reading it 3 different times.
Wow. And
it's at different points in life. And anytime I'm feeling a little off or a little bit out of sorts, reading a book like that really helps ground me. And so
is it about a single character? Is it about a group of people?
There's a bunch of characters in a bunch of different times in life, and there's a little time travel involved. There's some perfume involved. There's a couple demigods involved.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And the way he writes, it doesn't sound weird when he writes it. It's not a fantastic thing like a sci-fi or like a Tolkien story. It feels relatively normal for someone just to travel back in time to meet their previous spouse or a king from the Middle Ages or something like that. It's wonderful and fun and has some poignant things. This is a habit I've learned from Mr. Christian, but you can see I've sort of underlined stuff and circled words and found
annotation.
Yeah, I've annotated it along the way so that it's it's working with me, or I'm working with it, and it's just fun kind of stuff that I really enjoy.
Is there anything in there that you can share that you've annotated that is specific at all?
I did not come prepared with a quote. I wish I had now. I will say he has.
Now I'm interested in this book.
He has a line in. It might be in this book or one of his others. I'm not even sure, but it's something about never underestimate the value of a well-made taco and a cold bottle of beer. And I think that's just a pretty good credo for life.
Yeah. Wow.
But as my homework assignment, I will find you a couple passages from here to check out.
Have you read any Jack Kerouac at all? On the Road or any of the...
Yeah, I listen to On the Road. I do a lot of audio podcasts, or audiobooks rather. And I didn't quite get into it. I liked it. It was interesting. And I could kind of see how as a generational piece it was important, but I didn't connect with it.
Kind of sounds similar when you talk about like the spontaneous writing and the kind of just writing from your subconscious, your unconscious, and not really editing too much. It reminded me of Kerouac a little bit.
Because this is all stream of consciousness, right? It's just kind of one.
Pretty much. I mean, I think he went back to edit it, but it reads similar to how you're describing this book in that it's kind of just his thoughts, his impressions, and it doesn't seem like he went back to change anything. It's kind of just his, which is, I agree. It's interesting to read that type of writing. Even if you're not really sure like what the point of it or what it's really all about, it's real in some ways.
That's something Mr. Holly and Mr. Christian talk about a lot. Like the book isn't meant necessarily to answer the questions. It's meant to raise the questions. It's meant to get you thinking. And I think that's what great writers do, is they get you thinking and get you wondering and questioning. And I think Tom Robbins does it in his novels, as well as Malcolm Gladwell does it in his think pieces and sociological things. So he's been a good friend of mine, Tom Robbins, for many years. I think he's got about a dozen novels.
And Gladwell, you usually do the podcast, or do you do his audiobooks?
I get anything he puts out, I get a hold of.
Really?
He has a new one out called The Bomber Mafia.
I've seen that.
And they did it first as an audiobook. And most audiobooks, it's just a speaker reading the text, which is fine. And I still enjoy that. If you're going for a long bike ride, audiobook's a great companion. But for The Bomber Mafia, they did it more as performative art. So there's sound effects, and when they could, they had real audio of the people quoted in it, and it really brings it to life in a way that an actual book can't.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that, I just listened to a great Civil War historical novel called Killer Angels. It's about the battle at Gettysburg and Pickett's last charge. Coach Holly again turned me on to that, and I did the audiobook of that. At the same time, my dad was reading the hardcover book, and he said in the hardcover book there's all these maps and diagrams, and you kind of miss that because I have a hard time picturing what Pickett's charge looked like, but he's looking at the map.
Yep. He
saw the line they took and the hill they were being shot out from. And so I think there's trade-offs between the two mediums, and some things can come alive in that, and some you might miss a part.
Totally agree with that. That's what I was saying about McConaughey's book too, is
Greenlight.
I'm sure you've read that, all his little notes and stuff that you might miss if you're doing the audiobook.
Yeah.
Which, that's a great one.
Greenlights?
Yeah, Greenlights.
Yeah, David Foster Wallace is notorious in his writing for having enormous footnotes, ones that go on for pages.
Yeah.
And when you do the audiobook, they had to figure out a way to differentiate between the real text and the footnote. So what he does is he reads it in a different voice. And it's like the normal text in a little deeper voice, and the footnote is in a little higher voice.
That guy you really have to be on your game if you're reading David Foster Wallace.
Have you ever listened to, he did a commencement speech at Kenyon College called This Is Water.
Show it to all my classes all the time.
I like you even more, Jake.
Yep, This
Good
Is Water.
For you.
It's a keeper.
That is a keeper. An Infinite Jest might be a little bit.
Have you read that?
Yeah. I listened to it actually, and that was work to listen to.
Yeah. I have not read it yet.
Brace yourself. I mean, it is like
you need a summer.
It's a fight.
You need a summer van life excursion for that.
Exactly. Well, I've got a good one for sale if you ever need a van.
Might be interested.
Deal. You got a deal.
Well, Nathaniel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a great conversation. It's great to be back here in the studio. So appreciate it. Thank you, Cesare. And good stuff.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
For sure.
All right.
Awesome.